think Palantir's pre-crime ambitions, we have yet to really see them be fully implemented. But the program I mentioned earlier that was run by John Poindexter, the Total Information Awareness thing, the goal of that program was to prevent terror attacks before they could happen, as well as bioterror attacks and quote-unquote natural pandemics before they could happen, by surveilling Americans' shopping habits, the wastewater, i.e. our sewage, which is actually a program that Palantir started running for the U.S. government.
In a recent Before School podcast interview, Whitney Webb talks about AI, surveillance, digital currencies, and decentralized systems like Bitcoin. At the time, Bitcoin was priced at $99,000, up 3% in 24 hours, but down 7% over the past month. Like, subscribe, and share before hearing more from Whitney Webb.
It is known that U.S. intelligence can access people's devices remotely, and as I mentioned earlier, you have not only Epstein having all of these ties to what are now our biggest, the people that run or created the biggest companies in big tech, but a lot of those big tech companies were created with the direct involvement of our intelligence service, right? So as an example, Oracle, one of the biggest tech companies in the world, created by Larry Ellison. And before he created Oracle, he was working on Project Oracle at the CIA, and then turned it into a company that became a major contractor for the CIA, and now contracts for tons of other stuff. But you could argue that Larry Ellison never really let go of those ties, and I think there's plenty of evidence for that as well. And that doesn't mean everyone that works at Oracle is a spook, but I would argue that the tippy top of the leadership, as is common in a lot of these big tech companies, are very willing collaborators, if not part of this aforementioned blob. In the case of Google, there's a very good article that's been around for a long time by the journalist Nafez Ahmed, who I believe used to write at The Guardian, called How the CIA Made Google. Definitely worth your time. I've written a lot about Palantir in particular, which is really the engine of the surveillance state profiling pre-crime system that I sort of mentioned earlier. They were funded first by, its co-founder Peter Thiel, but also by the CIA's venture capital firm In-Q-Tel. The CIA was their only client for their first 3 to 4 years, maybe longer, I forget. As a company, their engineers went to Langley, Virginia CIA headquarters every 2 weeks, having the CIA tweak and give them guidance on the development of their product, according to current and then CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp. The intended clients of Palantir were always the CIA. It's really the closest thing you can really see as a CIA front company, essentially. And then, I feel like there's other examples as well. Facebook, as I've argued in my article, The Military Origins of Facebook, which came out in 2021, I believe, argues that Facebook was a repurposing of this DARPA program called LifeLog because of the people involved with it early on, how it essentially mirrors LifeLog exactly, and how the same people that put Facebook on the map, like Peter Thiel, had also repurposed other DARPA programs like Total Information Awareness as private companies, which in that case is the aforementioned company Palantir. It essentially explicitly a privatized version of this Total Information Awareness surveillance dragnet that was shut down by Congress. It was previously housed by the Pentagon's DARPA. It was shut down because of a huge outcry from the media, and also from Congress and all sorts of advocacy groups, because they rightly pointed out it would eliminate the constitutional right to privacy for Americans. And Palantir has done that, but from the the cozy operating room of the private sector. People weren't outraged by a private sector company doing it, but they were when the government was doing it. But it's a government contractor, so the government is still doing it. They just sort of have this degree of separation now between them. So essentially, if you have someone like Epstein who's operating on behalf of intelligence services, and I would argue that Epstein, not unlike Robert Maxwell, had his hands in more than one intelligence agency pie. I don't think it's necessarily fair to pin him down with one. But if you have him serving those particular agencies, and those agencies want the quote-unquote intelligence, and you use that to blackmail someone, and you have all these tech companies, and the person you want to blackmail uses Google, uses Oracle, uses Microsoft, or whatever, it's not very hard to be able to access all of their information. And a lot of things about these backdoors have been pretty widely established, and it's been something that's been going on a massive scale since the 1980s, at least. Maybe earlier, but we can definitely pinpoint key examples of it happening in the 80s and afterward.
After hearing Whitney Webb discuss AI surveillance, let's now hear her thoughts on how digital currencies like Bitcoin are impacted by these changes, and why decentralization could be key to safeguarding our privacy.
They have been piloting that. They call it predictive policing. I think they first started admittedly piloting it in 2015 in New Orleans and later in Los Angeles. And they had to shut down those programs because there was a big outcry because they were testing it almost exclusively in minority-dominant neighborhoods. And its algorithm was accused of being very racially biased, which is actually very common with things like facial recognition software and other software, surveillance software like that, that's applied to sort of law enforcement and crime applications. There's plenty examples of that being the case during COVID-19. And also, surveilling everyone's online activity and really anything that can be surveillable and having it be all in one, essentially one centralized database. And that was a big push from the intelligence community after 9/11 in general. And also, Larry Ellison of Oracle was a big voice in the private sector advocating for this, was that for all national security agencies should start sharing a database and stop having siloed databases. And you could argue that you could see then something we have heard a lot now, that data is the new oil. I think the CIA back in the 90s and early 2000s was very aware of the importance of having as much data as possible. Not necessarily just for, planned advances in artificial intelligence, but also that the idea that knowledge is power, and in the hands of these people, if they want to accumulate and entrench and expand their power, then you want to have knowledge on essentially everyone if you can. And a lot of U.S. surveillance programs going back to, stuff that was piloted in Vietnam by the CIA and the military, and going forward, a lot of efforts to sort of have information on people who could cause issues for the U.S. government at some point, would-be dissidents or actual dissidents, have profiles on those people. And what's very disconcerting to me is that actually during the previous Trump administration, the Attorney General William Barr actually legalized pre-crime in the United States by creating this Department of Justice program called DEEP, which is an acronym for something I can't quite remember, but it's something about the double E's are for early engagement. I think it's disruption and early engagement program or something like that. And basically, it hasn't been hugely implemented yet, but it has been used in certain cases where Americans have been preventatively arrested for crimes they didn't commit based on social media posts. And given what we've seen developing in more recent months in places like the United Kingdom, it's important to know that the United States has that stuff on the books. And that the incoming president, it was his previous administration that did that. And as far as I know, the current Attorney General nominee, Pam Bondi, nor anyone else in the Trump camp period has said anything about winding down DEEP. I would really hope that they do. But again, the incoming administration has a lot of ties to Palantir, including J.D. Vance, who is basically a proxy, arguably, for Peter Thiel, the co-founder of Palantir, as Peter Thiel was the person that bankrolled his entire political career and is responsible for his success in venture capital as well. So, and there's plenty of other ties there as well, and a lot of other prominent people tied to Thiel had been appointed to, or at least nominated to very important posts in the incoming administration. So, I think that is cause for concern, and also the fact that Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump in the previous administration were big advocates for this effort to create a U.S. government agency called HARPA, which is like this health DARPA. And actually Biden created it, but under different metrics. He said it was about curing cancer and called it ARPA-H. They moved the H to the back. But the architect of HARPA is this guy named Bob Wright, who was a longtime friend of Trump's because he ran NBC Universal, which hosted Trump's The Apprentice show. And so Bob Wright was basically pitching this program, and the biggest advocates again for it were Kushner and Ivanka. And the program, the acronym for it is Safe Homes, and that's kind of a long acronym. So again, I'm not going to remember exactly what it stands for, but I've written about it in the past, and I'm sure if you search for it, you'll be able to find it. But essentially, what this program was saying is that it was a way to stop mass shootings in the United States before they happen. And so this was being pitched in 2019, late 2019, when there was a spate of mass shootings in the United States. And essentially this program argued that they could stop mass shootings before they happen if they use an artificial intelligence algorithm to analyze American social media posts and then identify early warning signs of neuropsychiatric violence. And then based on that, and data on perhaps the poster's mental health data or any other sort of antecedent could then basically result in court-ordered medical interventions, preventative detention like house arrest, all sorts of things, essentially criminalizing social media posts in the name of stopping crime before it happens. So this is definitely something that has been considered by government for some time, and it's definitely something I would argue the infrastructure for it has been advanced in a bipartisan way by Republican and Democrat administrations alike. It's definitely, in my opinion, a long-standing national security agenda that is, if not openly, bipartisanly supported. It is so, at least privately, because you can see that through the policy actions of really every administration since 9/11. So I think people need to be very aware that the threat for this type of system being implemented more widely does exist because the infrastructure is there. And there have been presidents in the past that have considered pretty disconcerting overreach as far as that's concerned. And every government in the United States, or every presidential administration, has expanded Palantir's contracting. So now, in the wake of COVID-19, Palantir has all of Americans' health data, basically. They were given that during COVID-19. They were a key partner in Operation Warp Speed, deciding which groups would, receive the vaccine first, based on all sorts of metrics. And in doing that, obtained extreme access to Americans' health data, and there's no evidence that they don't share that with intelligence or add that to these profiles that they build on Americans.
To watch the full interview, check out the link in the description. We would love to hear your thoughts on some questions. Can Bitcoin truly protect against surveillance-driven economies? How do you see AI shaping the future of financial systems? Thank you for tuning in to Only the Savvy. If you enjoyed this discussion, please subscribe, like, and share our video for more engaging content, exploring the innovative world of decentralized technologies.